G'day, Ben from Duck Plain Chicken here. So time to get started on the assembly, and before I put these carriers together, of course I need to sort out the lighting for them. So I've done a little bit of work off camera just to make sure I know what I'm doing, and to then be able to show you the process that I went through to make it happen. So there's a couple of things, couple of pieces where we're going to be attaching our lights to. There's a couple of the decks, so to light underneath, it's going to be like this. It's quite dark down there, so we're going to put a light at the end. We're going to put a light at the end of this one, and we're going to be putting two lights in the engines. So that's what I'm going to be showing you in this particular video. Alright, so to start off, what I've created is I've taken the very small LEDs, try not to hit the camera. So I've taken these very small pre-wired LEDs, and to remind you of the ones that I'm using, these are 0603s. They're a warm white LED, and they've got 20 centimeter leads on them. So I've taken those and I have created a very small, it's like cross between a light box and a light pipe. So it's a bit hard to make out on camera, but what it is a thick sheet of plastic that has been sanded so that it sort of diffuses the light, and then I have stuck an image to the back of it facing out, so that's sort of the black lines you can see. I've stuck the LED to the back and then painted over it in black, and so the black prevents any light leaking out the back of the light. And so if I attach battery to it, and you can see what it looks like, and it's pretty rough. It's certainly not going to be the most ideal way of presenting the back of the carrier. I'll try and hold this still enough so you can actually sort of see what's going on. So it's not actually sort of the ideal representation of the back of the carrier, but at least it gives you a bit of an impression of something happening on the sides, a bit of forced perspective, and so it's lighter in the middle. It's actually coming across a lot brighter on camera than it is in real life, and it's got this sort of orange glow to it. So when that goes into, and it slides into this back piece here, which I will glue down, and it will slide in there so that when you're looking down the guts of the carrier opening, you'll be able to see that lit up at the end. I have tested it in a darkened room, and there's not a lot of light sort of bleed out onto the rest of the deck, which is a bit unfortunate, but it's sort of a bit of a balancing game between showing a bit of interest at the back of the carrier without it being too bright, and getting the light to sort of bleed out onto the decks on the tops of them. So, take you through the process of what I did to create it. First of all, I got some thick plastic. Now this is off a sketch pad, and it's probably about 1 mil thick, maybe a bit less, but it's got this, it sort of diffused the light as it is. I did actually sand it down, and I cut a very thin strip of it. Now if you haven't got access to plastic like that, you can just use normal clear polystyrene and sand it down. And so I just cut a strip which is the height of the space that's in the deck, and then I've just cut up small lengths of that so that it will actually fit. So if I show you one that I've prepared, so you get an idea, these things are getting pretty small. But if I check this, Now this is sitting right up the back, but at least you get a bit of an idea of how it's going to sit in there. So because it's thick, it works like a light pipe in the fact that it'll carry the light through it. But it's also going to be a bit of a light box because I'm going to blacken the whole area around it except for the front. So that way we only get light emitting through the front of it. Now, as far as the picture goes that I put on it, what I did was I grabbed a picture off the internet, and it's just of a sci-fi deck. And these things are tiny. So it's a bit even hard to sort of make out what it is. It really could be just a scribble on a page. It doesn't matter. I've printed this out on normal photocopying paper, and I've just printed it in black and white. Ideally, I probably want to print these in colour, but I don't have access to a colour printer at the moment. So I have upped the contrast, so it's almost like a line drawing. If I bring this up a bit closer, you can get an idea. And it's pretty rough. It doesn't look like anything in particular, but it's enough to give a bit of interest so it's not just a straight light. And so I have cut that out, and it's tiny, as all this stuff is when you work on the Mecha collection stuff. So I've got that bit of paper there, and I'm going to take this bit of plastic. I'm going to use some clamping tweezers to hold it steady, because what I want to do is use some clear orange. So this is the Crystal Orange by MIG, MO by MIG. And I'm actually going to use this to glue the piece of paper to the piece of plastic. So I'm going to use my dodgy palette here. And the thing is, I'm going to actually have the image, so I'm going to stick this face down so the image will appear out the other side of the frosted plastic. So instead of using glue, I'm actually just going to use the paint. I'm going to put a fair amount of paint on here, because it doesn't matter if it bleeds over on the sides or anything like that. It's really so we get enough on there so that the paper will adhere to it. So you can sort of see, you know, put quite a bit on it. So before that dries off, I'm going to take my piece of paper, flip it over, and just lay it down and try and position it as best I can before it all dries. And so you can see that image sort of shows through, but it gives it a little bit of depth because it's sort of on the back of that frosted plastic. So it's very subtle, but it actually works pretty well. So I just need to wait till we get all this paint dry. And you can see a bit of paint's bleeded through on the back, and that's perfectly fine. That doesn't matter at all. So being this stuff's acrylic paint, so it should dry reasonably quickly. Now the exact same process is done for the other deck as well. So there's a piece that sort of slots in here. And here's one I have prepared earlier, so it will fit down in that slot, and the wire will go out through this gap that I drilled out. Okay, the next step is to attach the LED. So the first thing I want to do is just make sure that the LED works. So I've tested this one, but just to show you. So you can see when I hook it up to a battery, it works. And I'm going to be using some UV resin. So resin that's cured under UV light, like what you would see in the modern day resin printers. So this stuff's just cheap UV resin. It wasn't particularly expensive, but it works perfectly fine. Now the advantage of using this stuff as opposed to say something like super glue, which you could use if you wanted to, is you've got time to set up everything and make sure that's all aligned and sitting properly before you hit it with the UV torch, and that's what sets it. So you've got as much working time as you need before you actually, before you use the torch to set it all up. So I'm just using this LED UV torch. So I get just a little palette or something. You do want to be careful with this stuff. You don't really want to be getting on your hands. It is horrible to sort of clean up and everything. I mean, I'm using such a small amount. I just put the palette over my piece of plastic here. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to put the resin on the back, so where the paper is, and I'm going to use a bit of scrap paper here. Just I really don't want to be getting this resin sort of on my cutting mat. I'm not going to be using very much of it at all. And then, so I'll squeeze a little bit out. I'm going to use a toothpick, and I'm first just going to brush a little bit. It might help if I actually hold it with the tweezers. I'm going to brush a little bit of resin across the back of the paper. Now what this should do is hopefully sort of sink in a little bit into the paper, otherwise the paper might just peel straight off. Now I have to take my LED and just line it up, because what I'm going to do is set it up and try and get it in a place that's sort of around the middle. Get a dab of resin, try to line it up as best I can. It does get tricky because the resin of course won't set until you put a UV light on it, so what I'll try and do is get it as best I can. I apologise that I can't get close to the camera for this, but as you can see it is incredibly fiddly. Okay, so I think I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to hit it with the UV lamp. Now the LED is stuck to the back of it. You can see we get that effect of the, it's really difficult to see on camera, the image coming through on the back, and that'll become a bit more obvious once we start painting the back of it black, because what that's going to do is sort of create that light box effect where the light will only be projected out the front. So the next step is to actually paint the back of it, and what I'm going to use for that is some Stynol Res. This stuff's an acrylic primer. So this stuff is the same as the Ultimate Modelling Products primer. I think MIG One Shot is the same sort of stuff. I think it's all comes out of the Badger factory. So, but really good primer. This, especially the black stuff. So give it a shake. And some people will use things like fabric paint, which is also a really good way to block out areas that you don't want light to leak through. But I find just a couple of coats of this stuff. And I'm going to do it on the edge as well, because really I want it black to cover up every area except that front facing panel. So it just looks like a bit of a black blob, but the front I've left clear. So So again, when we put the light on it, when we hook it up to a battery, there you can see, now it's maybe a little bit more evident that there's a picture behind there. So it's probably a little bit over the top, I don't know, but it was sort of the best way that I could sort of work out to do it with the tools that I've got at the moment. So that's basically the inner deck areas. So for these two parts, that's the sort of the lighting for those two. The next bit, of course, is the engines. So with the engines, again, I'm going to use the UV resin, and I want to sort of set up the LEDs in there, and I'm just going to use the resin to serve two purposes. It's going to stick the LED in there, but it's also going to create a bit of a window that I can put some clear paint in there to colorize it. I'm going to follow a pretty similar process. I'm going to take in some LEDs out of the pack here. So again, pre-wired LED, and again I'm going to test it just before it works fine. So first I'm going to thread the LED wires through the holes that I created. I'm just poking through that hole. And what I want to do is basically get some stuff out of the way it's trying to focus on. So what I want to do is get some resin in here, and then I'm going to attach the LED in there and then hit it with the UV light. And then we'll be left with a little window of resin in there that I can drop a little bit of clear colour in there to tint the lights coming out. So take a little bit of resin, now I should be able to maneuver the LED so I can get it sort of wedged in the hole a little bit. Now before I sort of set it off with the glue, I am just going to check first. Yep, there's light coming out of that, so that's pretty good. So I can get some more resin in there. Ooh, that's probably too much. Stuff is quite viscous, so it will sort of hold in place pretty well. Okay, and I can hit with the LED with the UV torch, and that will hold it in pretty well. And you might be able to just see it in there. It is, you can see the LED, but when it's lit up, it should actually look pretty good. Now, of course, the problem is we have on the back is that you can see the light as well. So we need to use the black paint to light block all of that. So again, I'm just using a Stynylrez black primer. Now the resin will work a lot like a light pipe, so you want to make sure that you cover the resin enough so that no light's going to escape out through it. If I get a good grasp of the battery, Okay. So there's a tiny sort of spot there I missed on the back. I'm just going to hit that with paint. Okay, so there it is on the front, and on the back there doesn't appear to be any light leak, so that's good. Actually, when light flickers it becomes a bit more noticeable. There's a tiny bit in here where it's poking through. Easy enough to fix. So I'll let this paint dry, and then I will do the other light on the other side as well. So that's essentially the process for setting up the lights. For the bases, I have just painted them black and thrown a matte coat over the top. So I've got the hole for the switch at the back. You know, once the switch is on the back, it's going to look alright, I think. Yeah, and the post as well. I've done that in sort of matte black. That's of course where the wire is going to go down. And I've got plenty of space in here for the battery and all the wiring. So I've done that for the 3 bases. So the bases are ready to go. Time to assemble everything. And so I'll be starting off by attaching the LEDs that go on the undersides of the decks. So this one will be positioned about in there somewhere, and the wire will come out the gap. So I'm going to be using UV resin again, and I'm just going to take a little bit on the toothpick, just dab it on the piece, and then what I want to do is get it lined up just the way I want it before I hit it with the UV light. And the problem is I've got to hold it down, so I apologise it's not all in shot. Okay, so let's see what we got. I mean, you could use hot glue or something like that, but the main thing is to have it tacked down and make sure that the LED mounted to that frosted plastic isn't sitting higher than the wall height, or otherwise you won't be able to put the part on top of it properly. Okay, so the next one we're going to do, which is the next deck down, and this one has a little gap on the side that we're going to run the wire out and then out through the side. So I'm going to take my pre-wired LED and try and wedge it in place as best I can. Alright, so that's what we've got there. It looks messy, but you're not going to see it once the deck is all sort of in place. So time to quickly check the LED just to make sure that it is still working okay. There we go. So it's still working. That's good. So now I want to feed the wires out through this hole on the side that I made, and then I'll put another bit of UV resin in there just to pin it all down. So you can see those wires are now fed out through the side, and I'm just going to put a little bit of resin just in that little valley there just to sort of hold it in place. It also prevents the wires from pinching on other pieces as they all get put together. The thing with doing lighting on model kits is quite often the insides of all your electrical work looks quite messy, but it doesn't matter. It's about what it looks like once it's all completed. So it's just important to know which bits are going to be covered up, which bits aren't going to be seen. There we go, that's in there nice and secure. Alright, so those pieces are done, which means the next thing to do is start feeding the wires from the engine assembly into the back of this part. So the engine gets mounted on these two pegs at the end. There's a hole there that the wires will feed through. Two of them will go out one side, two of them will go out the other side. Oh, let's see what this sort of shows. So you sort of see the wires going in the back there. We have actually 4 wires coming out on that top side and then 2 on this side. And when we put this piece in place, that will go on the side where there's only 2 coming out. So next step, trying to deal with all the spaghetti, is to get the very top deck on. Try not to crimp any of the wires while I'm doing it. So we've got 2 pairs of wires coming out that side, 2 pairs of wires coming out the other side. We have to put, let's see, this piece in place. Again, you just want to check that you're not crimping any wires when you're putting this together, because even though it's press fit, it does go reasonably tight. And once we have these 2 bits sandwiched on the top and the bottom here, I can now push the engine part into place. That all seals up relatively well. Alright, just clamp that down. Okay. Okay, Hairy McClary, this one. We've got these 2 little gaps here, and there's these 2 pieces that fill those gaps. So they just slot in there. They're the struts to support the back of the deck underneath. Then we have this section goes here. And of course, this last deck here, there's no light in there, and the reason for that is because you can see all the way through that one. So that's where the fighters come all the way through. The next thing I have to do is set it up so that these wires will basically hold in place and go along this line and down this little gap that I created here. So I'm going to again use the UV resin to hold it all in place. But to start, I think I might start on the other side because that's the trickier one. What I tend to do is use a blob of blue tack to hold the wires in place before I use the resin. So you see I've just sort of pinned those wires there, which means I can get a little bit of resin in there just to tack it in place. Okay, so those wires aren't going anywhere. Now I need to basically manage these other two. So let's see what's going on there. Now this end here, I might also tack this down, just because there's could be a danger of the wires pinching when I put the side piece on. The next thing I need to do is feed all these wires down through that little gap I made. So you can see the track of those wires are following, and I'm going to go ahead and do the other side, and I'll show you that when I'm done. Okay, so I have glued the wires in place using the UV resin on both sides so that they aren't in danger of being crimped by the other parts. So I've done that on both sides. The next step is to basically feed the wires through these two loops that I created on these two spots here. Okay, so I fed the wires all through those loops, so that way none of these wires are going to get crimped on these two pads here as the piece above it goes down. So the next step is I have to put in the pole with pipe. So of course I painted that in black. There's I need to make sure the slot lines the right way. And now I need to start feeding the wires down the pipe. You want to make sure the wire sort of feeds along and down into the slot that we made for the pipe. Okay, so we've got all the wires fed through, down through the pole. It's all looking pretty tidy. And now what I need to do is basically bring these two parts together, but I need to basically feed the wires further down. I can't just grab hold of this and pull them down, because it will likely break the wires. So I need to sort of do it gently, so as I'm bringing these two bits together, so you can see all that slack in that wire. So what I do is I get in there with some tweezers. So I'm sort of pulling the wires through. So I've taken up all that slack a lot more. Wires all coming down the bottom. I think we may be able to do a bit of wire wrangling. You can see those wires sort of fold on into that natural gap on that bottom panel. I just want to make sure that they are away, the wires are away from those pegs. Now we can look at putting the sides on. So that covers up all our wiring. Covers it all up beautifully. I should mention I did actually attach the guns too. They were all sort of separate, and I've attached them before putting this all together. There's literally only one extra piece I need to attach right at the very end, and that's basically because it's quite delicate. So I want to make sure I've got everything in place, ready to go before I put that in. So the next stage is basically wiring all this up to a battery, a switch, and getting it all tucked in the base. Off camera, I just soldered up all these 4 leads together, so both the positive and the ground. It's going to make it just a little bit easier to sort of feed it through the hole on the base. So the way this is going to work is the negative is going to be attached to the battery. The positive, we've got to go through a switch so that we can cut the circuit to turn it off and complete the circuit to turn it back on. So there'll basically be the red coming from the model and go to one part of the switch, and then there'll be another lead going from the switch to the battery. So a couple of things to do before I forget is to use some heat shrink and make sure you get that over the wires before. Actually, I could probably cut that one down, it's probably a bit long. You want to make sure you put the heat shrink over the wires before you start soldering. You can't get the heat shrink on after the fact. So I'm going to do that for the red wire there, and do the same thing for the black. Okay, so the way the switch works is that basically we have 3 pins here. So when the switch is in this direction, it means that the middle pin and the pin on the far right here are basically connected, joined up. If I go the other way, the middle pin and the one on the left is joined. So you just need to basically have a red wire attached to the middle and a red attached to, it doesn't matter which side, it just means that it's going to change which direction is on or off. So I'm going to the lead from the, and actually what I might do is I might take my red lead from here. So this will go to from the switch to the battery. So what I might do is feed this one through, because these switches actually have holes on them on the pins, which makes it a lot easier to sort of solder up. So here we can see that one's going to go to the battery. Then I can put some heat shrink over that. I might wait until I've got the other side hooked up before I worry about that. You get the other side hooked up without any problems. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now I'll take some heat shrink on this side. Of course, you don't want these two shorting out, or it means that they'll be, your lights are going to be permanently on So you want to make sure that it's the switch that controls closing the circuit. Now the next thing I'm going to use is to basically melt the heat shrink so that it wraps around the wires. And I actually find one of the best devices for doing that is actually a portable soldering iron. So this is a butane powered soldering iron, and it comes with essentially a blowtorch fitting on it, but this is really good for heat shrink. So fire this up. Okay, so heat shrink's not going to go anywhere, and it's going to prevent any sort of shorts from occurring. Alright, so we've got the switch wired up. The next thing is to basically wire up the battery. And now with this coin cell battery case, we've got the negative on one side and then the positive on the other. So you just want to make sure you get those right. Obviously, you know, when you put the battery in, you want to follow the directions of the casing, and you want to make sure that that works with your circuit. So before I attach these, what I'm going to do is tin the wires so that there's some solder on there. Okay, so for the positive side, I've actually tinned both points, but it doesn't matter which one you use, just need to use one. No, it's not the best camera angle, I apologise for that. This is all a little bit fiddly. Trying to work out the best way of doing this. And what we'll do is have that sign there. What I can do, blue tack, it's as good as a third hand. Okay, so what I want to do is I basically want to put the battery in and test the switch before I sort of set everything up in place. If I need to fix something that's in here, obviously I want to do it at this stage. So let's put the battery in, and it looks like I've already got the switch on. So you can see we've got the two lights at the back there. You can see a little bit of light leakage, which annoys me. And you can see the two lights down there, so that means that's working. Alright, so I'm going to wire the switch, or actually attach the switch I should say. So I'm not really sure how effective this is, but we've got this washer here that's got sort of teeth in it, and I want to put that, see if that gives it any bite into the PVC base that I'm using. Alright, so as I'm feeding this through, I want to make sure I don't pinch any wires. Alright, feed that and push that into place. Okay, so there we have our mounted chip with the switch on the back. Put the battery in it. I'm going to turn this light off so it's a little bit easier to sort of see when it lights up. Okay, let's see if you can see the two lights at the back. You can see the two lights up the guts of it. You can also see a little bit out the side here, which is okay because that's sort of a bit of a window thing anyway. So you can sort of see how that looks out there. The lights are sort of a lot brighter on camera than they are in real life. So you can actually sort of see there's a little bit of light leak here, which I think I'm going to have to sort of deal with. But now I haven't coloured the rear engines yet, so I'm going to do that with some clear paint. Turn the switch off. So thankfully the electronics are all working. The very last step I need to do is to colour the engines. So at the moment you can see that they're a sort of a warm white colour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of this, which is Ammo by MIG Crystal Red, Amigo 93. It's very, even though it's called Crystal Red, it's actually very pinky. So I think it's going to be perfect for this. So while I've got the LEDs turned on, I'm actually going to just dab a little bit of clear red in there. Just to the point so we get more of a pretty tinge. You can already see how different that looks. There we go. So that way we've got sort of a real yellow in the back there and more of a red. Now it's interesting what the camera's picking up, because it looks like it's redder on the left than it is on the right, but in real life that's not so much the case. So it's interesting, the sensitivity of digital cameras with LEDs and the colour. So anyway, that's pretty much it for that particular stage. And here we have the completed models. So from the top view you can see the sort of variation in the top decks, which is probably the main difference between them. The kits assemble all the same way, but they have actually come up really well. Pretty happy with those. Yeah, and as a set of three they actually look really good. So they've all been lit, all been checked. But really what I love about these kits is, especially the new Mecha collection kits, they go together so well, you know, typical sort of Bandai engineering. But you can sort of take them as far as you want, you know. They could be a quick half-hour build if you wanted to just, you know, build them and quickly slap a coat of paint on them, or you can go into a higher level of detail where you're putting lights in. And I should say for each one of these I've probably put in about 12 or 13 hours, so even though they're tiny little models, I certainly got my money's worth out of them, given that they're only sort of 7 or 8 Australian dollars each. And yeah, and I mean, a lot of that time just went into the lighting side of things. It wasn't, and masking. So you don't have to go down that path if you don't want to. These can be really quick builds, and they look fantastic on your shelf, you know, the small battleships. So next to roll on to the glamour shots, and then I will see you in the next build series. See you later.